I came home at 6:47 on a Friday evening. I remember the time because I had checked my phone at the light on Forsyth, noticed a notification from the clinic about a scheduling conflict on Monday, and told myself I would deal with it over the weekend. I was tired in the kind of way that settles into your bones. After a full week of managing other people's problems, my feet hurt, my shoulders were tight. I was thinking about eating whatever was left in the fridge and going to bed early. I was not thinking about what was waiting for me in my own kitchen. When I pushed open the back door, the smell of coffee hit me first, then voices, then silence. The kind that drops suddenly when someone walks into a room where they weren't expected. My mother was sitting at the head of the table. She always sat there, even after my father died, as if the seat itself was a crown she refused to give up. Livia was to her left, picking at her nails the way she does when she's nervous, but doesn't want to show it. Grant was next. To Livia, leaning back in his chair with that half smile he wears when he's already decided. He's won something. Between them on the table was a cream-colored folder, thick with papers, the edge of a blue notary stamp visible near the top. I set my bag down by the door. My mother looked at me the way she has always looked at me, like I was slightly late to something I hadn't been invited to. "Good," she said. "You're here. I was going to call you." I didn't answer. I waited. "I need you to pack your things tomorrow," she said, her voice flat and final, the tone of someone issuing a schedule change, not dismantling a life. "I already sold your share of the house." The room didn't move. Grant's smile widened by a fraction. Livia looked down at the table as if the grain of the wood had become suddenly fascinating. I stood there for a moment, holding my keys. "Sold it," I said. "Donovan Price," my mother said. "He's been fair. You'll receive a small consideration, enough to secure yourself an apartment somewhere decent. 24 hours is generous. Naomi, I have been thinking about this for months. It's the right decision for this family." I looked at the folder on the table. I looked at the blue stamp. I thought about what kind of document would require a notary seal, and what kind of person would bring a notarized document to a kitchen table before telling her daughter she no longer had a home. I looked at Livia, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Okay," I said. That was all I said. I picked up my bag, walked down the hall, and closed the door to my room, quietly behind me. What my mother did not know, what none of them sitting at that kitchen table could have imagined, was that I had been waiting for exactly this moment for almost 2 years. My father had made sure I would be ready. Let me tell you about this house. It was built in 1948 by a man named Wallace Birch, who sold it to my grandfather in 1971 for less than most people spend on a car today. The floors are original heart pine and they creak, in a specific pattern, depending on the weather. Different in summer than in winter, different after rain than in dry heat. There are windows in the front parlor that have never been replaced, thick old glass with a slight green tint that makes the afternoon light look like it's coming through river water. The kitchen ceiling has a water stain shaped like the state of Florida, and every member of this family has pointed at it at least once in their life, usually to make a child laugh. My father loved this house the way some men love their children, quietly, completely, without needing anyone to understand it or applaud him for it. Everett Bellamy was not a man who said much. He had worked as a naval carpenter for 31 years, the kind of work that teaches you that the difference between a boat that floats and one that sinks is usually something small, something you can only see if you look closely, honestly. He applied that same attention to everything in his life. He fixed things before they broke. He kept meticulous records of every repair, every payment, every contract. He filed everything in a green metal cabinet in his study, organized by year and category, and he taught me early, when I was still young enough that I thought it was just a game, that a piece of paper filed correctly is worth more than any promise ever made out loud. My mother never understood that about him. Or maybe she did, and it annoyed her. She preferred conversations. She preferred to control things through tone and implication, through making someone feel guilty for needing what they needed. Filing systems and notarized records were not her language. She thought the world ran on relationships and pressure. She was not entirely wrong, but she had forgotten about paper. After my father retired, the medical expenses started. Small things at first, a knee that needed attention, a blood pressure situation, then his heart. He spent the last 4 years of his life managing one condition after another, with the same methodical patience he had applied to everything else. I was here for all of it. I scheduled the appointments. I drove him to Savannah Memorial and to the specialists in Augusta. I sat in waiting rooms with organized folders of insurance paperwork while my mother attended Livia's events and Grant's family functions and whatever else placed a higher demand on her calendar than her husband's declining health. I am not telling you this to paint myself as a saint. I am not one. There were days I resented being the one who stayed. There were nights I lay in my childhood bed wondering if I had made a terrible mistake not building a separate life somewhere else. But I stayed. And when I stayed, I did what needed to be done, because that is what the situation required. While I was here, I discovered the property taxes hadn't been paid in 3 years. I found out when a formal notice arrived in a red envelope, and my mother held it out to me the way she handed me things she didn't want to deal with without explanation, without context, as if my taking it was simply understood. I paid them. All of them. $12,400 spread across 6 months of my savings. When the back porch collapsed in the storm of 2021, I hired the contractor. I supervised the work, communicated with the building department, signed the permits. My mother was in Atlanta, visiting Livia for 2 weeks during the entire repair process. She did not ask how it went when she returned. She mentioned she liked what they'd done with the railing. When the water heater failed on a January morning and the pipes were at risk, I got up before 5, called 3 plumbers, and stayed home from work to let the one who could come earliest inside. I paid the invoice in cash because the house account had been sitting at a 0 balance. Since November, I did not tell anyone. I just paid it. I have receipts for all of it, every one, because my father taught me that you always keep the receipts. He knew what I was doing. He watched every payment, every weekend I gave to contractors, instead of to myself. Every conversation I had with utility companies and insurance adjusters, and neighbors concerned about the fence. In the last year of his life, when he was mostly in the sitting room with his crossword puzzles and his afternoon tea, he would sometimes look at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, not quite pride, not quite apology, something in between, a reckoning maybe. The February before he died, he asked me to drive him somewhere. He did not tell me where. He gave directions as I drove left here, right at the light, down past the parking garage. He directed me to an office on Whitaker Street, a small suite on the second floor with frosted glass on the door and a brass nameplate. Helena Voss, Notary, Public and Legal Document Services. I need to take care of something, he said. Come in with me. I sat in a chair near the window while he spoke to Helena Voss at her desk for a long time. I could not hear everything through the white noise machine she kept running near the door. What I heard was enough to know he was talking about the house, about me, and about what he wanted to happen when he was no longer here to make sure it happened. At one point, Helena looked up from her notes and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. It was not a casual look, it was an assessment. I held her gaze and she gave a small nod like she was checking something off a list and returned to my father's words. I did not know then what it meant. I know now. He died 11 months later, a Tuesday in February, quietly in his chair, the crossword unfinished on the side table beside him. The paramedic said it had been fast. I have held on to that. After the funeral, my mother moved quickly. She had always been better at beginnings than she was at grief. Within 3 months, she had begun conversations with a real estate contact she found through Grant's professional network. She mentioned it to me once, framed as exploring options, language designed to sound responsible while revealing nothing. I said nothing back. I nodded and went to the kitchen to do the dishes. But 1 week after my father's funeral, Helena Voss called, not to offer condolences. Her voice was professional, composed. She said, "Your father left something in my care. When the time comes, you will know to call me." She paused. "I believe you will know." I wrote her number down in the small notebook I keep in my work bag. I kept it there for nearly 2 years, and I waited. That Friday night, after my mother's announcement, I did not cry. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought carefully and specifically. I thought about the phrase, your share, and what it implied. I thought about the cream folder on the table, about the blue notary stamp at the edge, about what kind of transaction requires that stamp before the owner has been told the sale is happening. I thought about Grant's expression, that particular brand of satisfaction worn by men who believe they have just outmaneuvered someone they never considered a real opponent. I opened my work bag and found the small notebook. I found Helena Voss's number. I texted her at 8:14 p.m. I said, "My father's name was Everett Bellamy. I believe the time has come." She replied 12 minutes later, "I will be in the office at 8 tomorrow morning. Please come." I spent the rest of that night doing something that might have looked, to anyone watching, like giving up. I began moving boxes. Not everything, not furniture, not things I would need in the coming week, but I carefully carried my father's framed photographs down from the hallway, the box of letters he'd kept from his years at the shipyard, the small wooden box he gave me when I turned 30, carved with my initials, inside which was a single brass key I had never used because I had never been told what it opened. I moved those things first. I put them in the back seat of my car, covered with a blanket. My mother passed my door twice that evening. The second time she stopped and spoke through the wood. "I think you're doing the right thing, Naomi. This will be better for everyone. You'll have a fresh start." I didn't answer her. I kept folding. At 7:50 the next morning, I was sitting in the parking lot on Whitaker Street with 2 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee I was making last. The September air was warm already, the kind of Savannah morning that smells like hot pavement and river water. Helena Voss opened the door herself at exactly 8 o'clock. She was exactly what I remembered from the one time I had seen her silver hair pinned back, reading glasses on a chain, charcoal blazer, flat shoes. She shook my hand with a firm grip and led me inside without unnecessary conversation. This was a woman who understood that some moments do not require small talk. She placed a sealed manila envelope on the desk between us. "Your father came to me 2 years and 4 months ago," she said. "He asked me to hold this and to deliver it to you under one specific condition. Only if your mother attempted to sell or transfer the property without your written notarized consent." She paused. "Did she?" She told me last night, I said. Those were her words. She said she had already sold my. There's a buyer named Donovan Price. There was a cream folder on the table with what looked like a notary stamp on the documents. Helena nodded once. Open it. The envelope had a seal across the flap, unbroken, authenticated, dated with Helena's stamp. I broke the seal and reached inside. There were 4 items. The first was a certified copy of the property deed, updated and filed 18 months before my father's death. The document showed a transfer of 58% ownership from Everett Bellamy to Naomi Grace Bellamy, recorded, indexed, and filed with the Chatham County Register of Deeds on a specific date in a specific book on a specific page. Real, official, unambiguous. The second item was a folder of receipts. 8 years of payments organized by date, property, tax notices, and payment confirmations. Contractor invoices with my signature, utility payment, records, repair permits filed in my name. Every one of them. I had not known he was collecting them. He had been gathering them quietly, the way he gathered everything without announcement, without fanfare. The third was a handwritten letter. 2 pages. His handwriting, small and deliberate, the way he wrote everything, like each word was being placed somewhere permanent. The fourth was a small USB drive. Helena said, the recording on that drive was made here in this office, witnessed by me, on the same day the deed was executed. He wanted you to hear his voice when you read the letter. I put the USB in my bag. I was not ready for it yet. I looked at Helena and asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the night before. Can this stop the sale? She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me directly. That depends on what was filed. But if they represented themselves as having your consent, without obtaining it, that is fraud. And if your father's deed transfer was properly recorded, at the county level, which it was, I filed it myself, then 58% of this transaction was never in your mother's legal authority to complete. She let that settle. Do you have an attorney? Not yet, I said. I do, she said. I believe you should call him today. His name is Adrian Kell. Adrian Kell's office was on Drayton Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse. It looked exactly the way a serious attorney's office should look, organized, quiet, built for function rather than impression. He met with me that same afternoon. Helena had called ahead. He shook my hand, offered me a seat, and placed a yellow legal pad on the desk between us. Without preamble, he read the documents I'd brought carefully, occasionally making a note. He asked precise questions. He did not express sympathy in a way that felt performed, and he did not express shock. He simply processed the information, consulted a database for several minutes, and then leaned back in his chair and looked at me. The deed transfer is valid and recorded, he said. That means 58% of that property was not your mother's to sell. The central question is what was represented to the buyer and what documents were submitted to authorize the full transaction. She told me she sold my share, I said. Those were her exact words, which means your name almost certainly appears on the seller authorization. He made a note. We need to see what was filed. I'll make a records request today. Can you give me 48 hours before making any visible moves? I said yes. In the meantime, he added, do not move out of that house. Your presence matters legally. Do not let anyone pressure you into leaving before this is resolved. That was harder than it sounds. By Sunday, my mother had shifted from announcement to enforcement. She moved through the house with the energy of someone redecorating in their mind, pausing to look at the furniture in the parlor, commenting on what would stay and what she imagined the new owners might want to change. She had already begun separating items she considered hers from the general household objects, placing small colored stickers on things, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't existed. in this house for 8 years. Olivia came by with Grant, and the two of them walked through the rooms talking about layout, renovation potential as if I were already gone or had never been there in the first place. Grant paused outside my closed door, and I heard him say to Livia, just loud enough, I don't understand why she has to make this difficult. It's honestly embarrassing. Livia said nothing, but she didn't correct him either. My mother came to my room that evening. She came in without knocking. She had never knocked in my adult life, which was one of many small and daily reminders that she did not truly see this as my space, regardless of what she said about it. She sat on the edge of my bed and used her softer voice, the one she reserved for delivering things she had already decided. I know this feels like a lot, she said, but you have to be practical, Naomi. You don't have children. You don't have a husband waiting. You have a good job. You can build something of your own, somewhere that's actually yours. This house is just wood and old windows. It is an opportunity for all of us to finally move forward. I looked at her. Did you get my signature on the authorization? I asked. She didn't hesitate. We handled everything through the estate documentation. Which estate documentation gave you authority to sign for my share? Her voice sharpened. Naomi, don't be difficult. I'm asking a specific question, I said. I'd like a specific answer. She stood up. This conversation is over. You have until Wednesday morning. And she left, pulling the door half closed behind her. She had not answered the question. That was the answer. The following morning, Adrian called. He had obtained the preliminary records from the county. My name appeared on the seller authorization document signed, dated, and notarized, but the notarization had been performed by a mobile notary service, not a licensed county office. The stamp was registered, but barely, and the signature itself, when compared to samples from the panned receipts in Helena's envelope, had notable inconsistencies. The pressure distribution, the angle of the loops in the letters, the way the Y at the end of Bellamy was formed. I want to bring in a certified document examiner, Adrian said, but what I'm seeing at preliminary review is a signature that does not match your known samples. It's not mine, I said. I never signed anything. Okay, he said. And that was all he said, but the way he said it told me everything I needed to know about where this was going. What nobody at that kitchen table had anticipated was Rowan Blake. He had been contracted by Donovan Price 3 weeks earlier to conduct the property appraisal, a standard step before any high-value acquisition. Rowan was thorough in the way that either earns you a strong reputation or makes you inconvenient to clients who want a smooth transaction. In this case, it was both. During his review, Rowan noticed that the deed on file at the county register did not match what he had been given in the seller documentation package. The ownership percentages were different. He flagged it to Price's office. He was told it was a clerical discrepancy that had been addressed. He asked for written confirmation. He didn't receive it. He followed up. He was then told by someone in Price's acquisitions team that the deal was proceeding as planned and his appraisal role was complete. Rowan did not feel comfortable with that. He was not the kind of person who invented problems, but he was also not the kind of person who could file his final report on a property and feel settled when he knew something hadn't been explained properly. He kept the email chain. He kept his notes. He went home and filed the appraisal and tried to move on to the next job. But the Bellamy property stayed in the back of his mind. He happened to be at the Chatham County Register of Deeds office on the same morning Adrian filed the records request. He was pulling comparable sales data for a different project across town. He saw the name Bellamy come up on the counter log and made a connection he couldn't ignore. He asked the clerk a single question. He received a single answer. Then he pulled out his phone, found the email chain from Price's office still sitting in his sent folder, and looked up Adrian Kell's name on the Georgia State Bar website. He called that afternoon. He told me later that he was not trying to insert himself into something that wasn't his business. He said he'd flagged the issue through the proper channel, been ignored, and that was the part he couldn't get past. If something went wrong and he could already see that something was wrong, he did not want his appraisal to be the document that made it look clean. He forwarded Adrian the complete email chain. The final message in the chain, sent from a named senior account manager in Donovan Price's office, contained the phrase, "Proceed as planned." It had been sent 9 days before the anticipated closing date. It had been sent after Rowan's written flag about the deed discrepancy. That email became the second most important document in our case. Meanwhile, my mother made the mistake that only becomes possible when someone is certain they have already won. On Tuesday morning, while I was at the clinic, she went into my room. I had suspected she might. I had watched her, in the days after the Friday announcement, moving through the house with an inventory mindset, taking stock of what was where, what mattered, what might be in the way of her narrative. I had seen the same look on her face that I'd seen the week after my father's funeral, when she had gone through his study desk drawer by drawer, searching for something I had noticed and I had not forgotten. Before I left for work that Tuesday morning, I set up a small wireless camera on the bookshelf above my desk, angled toward the door and the area near my dresser. It was the kind sold in hardware stores for home monitoring, battery-powered, connected to my phone by an app. I purchased it 6 months earlier during a period when things in the house had begun to feel unsettled in ways I couldn't quite name. It ran continuously. I activated the motion alert before I left. During my lunch break, the alert showed 47 minutes of recorded motion, starting at 9:22 a.m. I watched the footage from my desk, eating a sandwich I barely tasted. My mother entered the room. She went directly to the dresser and began opening drawers. She moved to the small cabinet beside my bed. She pulled out a storage box, old receipts, birthday cards, photographs, and went through it methodically, not frantically. She was not panicking. She was looking for something specific, with the calm of a person who was sure they had the right to look. She found nothing useful. She replaced the box. She checked the closet shelf, brought down a shoebox. Inside were letters my father had written me over the years, rubber-banded together. She looked at them, put them back, and left the room at 10:09 a.m. She had been looking for the envelope. She didn't know it had never been in this house. It had been in Helena Voss's office for 2 years and 4 months. My father had understood his wife in a way that protected his daughter from exactly this moment. On Wednesday morning, instead of packing my car, I drove to Donovan Price's office building on Bay Street. I arrived 20 minutes before my mother and Livia and Grant, who had arranged to meet Price that morning to finalize the closing timeline. I knew the meeting was scheduled because Livia had texted me the previous night, not to include me, but to remind me that I needed to be completely out of the house by Thursday. She had added, "I hope you understand this is what's best for the family, Naomi. Mom needs this to happen." I had read the message. I had put my phone face down on my nightstand. I had slept. Adrian was already in the lobby of Price's building when I arrived, a leather portfolio under his arm. Helena Voss stood beside him, posture perfect, her own folder held precisely at her. The three of us went upstairs together, without speaking more than necessary. We were already seated in the conference room when Price's assistant opened the door from the Cumbry outside. Price himself came in, first 51 years old, expensive suit, the practiced confidence of a man who had walked into dozens of rooms like this and won. He looked at us and took a fraction of a second too long to arrange his expression. He sat down. His two attorneys sat beside him. Adrian placed the certified deed transfer on the table first. He placed the county records, showing the authorization discrepancy beside it. He placed a copy of the document examiner's preliminary report next. He placed Rowan Blake's email chain last, face up, the key sentence, visible without anyone needing to look for it. He did not make a speech. He did not raise his voice. My client holds 58% ownership of the property at 1124 Drayton Lane, recorded, and indexed with Chatham County. 18 months before the date of this transaction, Adrian, the seller authorization submitted to facilitate this sale includes a signature that was not executed by her and has been assessed as inconsistent with her known signature samples by a certified document examiner. Additionally, this office was notified in writing of the deed discrepancy prior to the anticipated closing date and elected to proceed regardless. One of Price's attorneys leaned forward to speak. Adrian held up one hand, not rudely, just firmly, like a man who had done this before and knew exactly when to hold the floor. "We are not here to negotiate," he said. "We are here to provide formal notice that this transaction cannot be legally completed. Any attempt to do so will result in a filing for fraud, forgery, and civil damages." The door opened. My mother walked in first, already mid-sentence to Livia about something. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes moved from my face to Adrian's to Helena's. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite fear, but its well-dressed cousin. Livia came in behind her. Then Grant, who read the room fast and stepped slightly back from this table, like he was considering his options. My mother recovered first. She looked at Price, then at Adrian, then back at me, and in the voice she used for public disagreements, reasonable sounding, slightly aggrieved, she said, "Naomi, I told you to stay out of this. You are making this so much harder than it needs to be." "I heard you," I said. "You are doing this to hurt your sister. You have always made everything—" "Mrs. Bellamy." Adrian's voice was not unkind. "I strongly recommend you speak with your own attorney before saying anything further in this room." Grant stepped toward the table anyway. "This is harassment. She has no legal standing here." Adrian slid the deed transfer across the table surface until it landed in front of Grant. "She has 58%. That gives her standing." The room went very quiet. Grant picked up the document and read it. I watched his face move through the information. I watched Livia's hand find the back of a chair and hold it. I watched my mother's expression do the thing it does when the ground changes under her, that brief, almost invisible moment of recalculation before the new performance begins. For the first time in my memory, the performance didn't come immediately. Price's attorneys asked for a recess. Price himself had said nothing since sitting down, which told me his own team had already advised him of his exposure. Grant followed the attorneys out. My mother's attorney, who had arrived separately and was standing near the window, moved to speak with her quietly. Livia stayed where she was. She looked at me across the conference table. Just us for a moment. "Did you know?" she asked. Her voice was quieter than I expected, stripped of its usual performance quality. "About the deed? Yes," I said. "For a while. Mom told me there was nothing official. She said you didn't have anything in writing." I know what she said. Livia looked down at the document still on the table. She was quiet for a long time, then she said, almost to herself, almost as if she had forgotten I was there, she told me the same thing, about Dad's savings account. I did not answer that, but I noted it and I held it carefully. 3 nights before the civil hearing, I finally listened to the recording. I sat at the kitchen table after 11 o'clock with the small USB drive, my laptop, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The house was quiet, the way old houses are quiet, not silent, but settled, like it was breathing slowly. The refrigerator hummed. The magnolia outside moved against the window glass. I pressed play. My father's voice came through the laptop speakers, and I had to pause after the first sentence. Not because I was unprepared, I had known the recording existed for weeks. I paused because his voice was exactly as I remembered it, and I had not quite anticipated how that would feel. In the quiet of the kitchen where he used to drink his morning coffee, I sat for a moment with my hand over my mouth. Then I pressed play again. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then it happened the way I thought it might. And I'm sorry. You had to wait for it. I'm sorry I couldn't fix it differently while I was still alive too. Do it." He had recorded it in Helena's office. There was ambient sound in the background traffic from Whitaker Street, the low hum of the air conditioning unit. His voice was steady, not dramatic, not weak. Just him, speaking carefully, the way he always spoke when something mattered. I want to say a few things. The house first, because that's the legal part and I need it to be clear for anyone who might hear this. I transferred the majority of the deed to Naomi because she is the one who kept this house standing while I was too sick to do it myself. Not because I love her more than the others. A father doesn't calculate love that way, and I want that understood. But because what she did deserves to be recognized in the only language that holds up in a courtroom. She gave this house 8 years of her weekends and her savings and her patience, and she never once made me feel like it was a sacrifice. A piece of paper with my name on it was the least I could do. I heard him clear his throat, a small sound I had forgotten, that specific sound. The other thing I want to say is this. I know your mother, I know Livia. I love them both, and I know their weaknesses, the way you know the cracked places in your own walls. Celia is not a cruel woman at her core. She is a frightened one, and frightened people do things that look like cruelty because control is the only language that makes them feel safe. I am not asking you to forgive her. That is your choice to make, in your own time, on your own terms. I am asking you not to become what she is. I am asking you to stay the person you have always been. Another pause. I heard him shift in Helena's office chair, the same small creak I recognized from his chair at home. Naomi, you have been the person I trusted most in this family for a long time, not because you are without flaws, you are not. And neither was I, but because when things needed to be done, you did them. You didn't wait to be asked. You didn't keep score out loud. You just did what the situation required, and then you went to work the next morning, and you never said a word about it to make anyone feel small. I saw it all. I kept every receipt. I want you to know that it was I seen. He paused again, longer this time. This house is yours, not as punishment for anyone, not as a verdict on who mattered more, as recognition. You earned it the right way. Quietly, consistently, without asking for credit. That is worth more than anything I could have put in a document, but I put it in the document anyway, because paper holds up in court and love does not always. His voice softened at the very end. I love you, baby girl. I hope you are okay. The recording ended. I sat in that kitchen for a long time afterward. When I finally got up to put my cup in the sink, I looked up at the ceiling. The water stain, shaped like Florida. The one that had been there since before I was born, since before anyone. In this family thought to replace the pipe in the upstairs bathroom. I had looked at it thousands of times. That night, for no reason I could fully explain, I laughed. Not a big laugh, Just the kind that comes when something that has been heavy for a very long time gets put down. I went to bed. I slept 7 straight hours without once waking up. The hearing was 4 days away. The civil hearing was held in a courtroom on Montgomery Street. It was not a criminal proceeding. There was no jury, no gallery, no cameras. There was a judge, named the Honorable Patricia Osei, a small, deliberate woman with a reputation among the Savannah legal community for asking questions that distinguished between prepared attorneys and performed ones. She had handled estate and property disputes for over 2 decades. She did not waste time. My mother arrived dressed with intention. Powder blue blazer, pearl earrings, hair pressed and set. She looked like a woman attending her own vindication. When she walked in and saw me, already seated at the petitioner's table, she arranged her expression into wounded dignity look I had seen her use at school meetings and family gatherings and doctor's offices anywhere. She needed the room to read her as the reasonable one. Livia sat beside her. Grant was not present. His attorney had advised it. Adrian presented our case in the way he did everything methodically, without theater. He submitted the certified deed transfer, recorded and indexed with all required information. He submitted the 8 years of payment receipts, organized and totaling just under $41,000 in documented property maintenance paid by Naomi Grace Bellamy. He submitted the document examiner's findings, which concluded with high probability that the signature on the authorization form was inconsistent with my known signature samples across multiple comparison points. He submitted Rowan Blake's written statement and the email chain from Price's office with the key instruction proceed as planned highlighted. Then Helena Voss took the stand. She was exactly as I would have predicted, unhurried, precise, unwilling to be redirected by any question that tried to take her somewhere she hadn't decided to go. She confirmed that Everett Bellamy had come to her of his own initiative and demonstrated full legal capacity on the date of execution. She confirmed the deed transfer was notarized by her personally with her seal and filed with the Chatham County Register. She confirmed she had held the sealed envelope as instructed for 2 years and 4 months and delivered it to me when the stated condition and attempt to sell the property without Naomi's verified consent had been met. My mother's attorney tried to suggest the deed transfer might have been made under undue influence, citing my father's illness and his emotional dependence on me during his final years. Helena looked at him over the rim of her glasses. I have been a notary for 31 years, she said, evenly, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. I do not execute instruments for individuals who cannot demonstrate full and clear legal capacity at the time of signing. Mr. Bellamy arrived at my office of his own. Arrangement, communicated the nature and purpose of the document precisely, asked informed questions, reviewed the language carefully, and signed with complete deliberateness. I found no indication of impairment, undue influence, or confusion on any of the 3 occasions I met with him. The attorney did not press further. Rowan Blake testified briefly and exactly. He described what he had observed during the appraisal. Review. He described the written flag he sent to Price's office. He read, on the record, the email response he received. He stated that he had understood from that response that his concern had been deliberately set aside, that the transaction had proceeded with awareness of the discrepancy, and that he had retained all documentation because he could not, in good conscience, allow his appraisal to be associated with a transaction he had formally questioned and been overridden on. The judge listened to everything without expression. When she spoke, She was direct and unhurried. The deed filed by Everett Bellamy reflects a valid and properly recorded transfer of 58% ownership in this property to Naomi Grace Bellamy, predating this transaction, superseding any seller authorization submitted without her verified consent. The authorization document presented to facilitate this sale contains a signature that has been assessed by a certified examiner as inconsistent with the owner's known samples. On those grounds, this sale is void as a matter of law. She looked up from her notes. The court further notes that documentary evidence presented today raises questions beyond the scope of this civil proceeding, specifically regarding the authorization document and the notarization supporting it. These materials will be referred to the State Attorney's Office for review. The room held its breath for a moment. My mother sat very still. Her attorney leaned close and spoke quietly. She nodded, one small motion, and did not look at me. She did not look at me once, from that moment until she stood to leave. I did not need her to. Outside the courtroom, on the stone steps in the early afternoon light, Adrian told me I had been the most organized client he had worked with in 15 years of estate litigation. Helena patted my arm and said my father had made the right choice in trusting me with the envelope. Rowan Blake, who had taken the morning away from another project, said he hoped the house was worth the trouble. It is, I said. I drove home through the middle of the day, Savannah moving around me the way it always does. Slow and warm and layered, Spanish moss over everything, the smell of the river if the wind. I was right. I turned onto Drayton Lane and pulled into the driveway of a house that was legally and completely and without question mine. I walked in through the back door, I set my bag down, I put the kettle on, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, where the magnolia my father planted the year I was born had begun its early blooming, a few weeks before most of the others on the street. That evening I sat on the front porch in his chair, the letter from the envelope folded in my eye and lap, and I thought for a long time about what he had said in the recording about not becoming what she was. I thought about how much easier it would have been to be angry in a loud way, to let the anger find a voice and use it. I thought about why I hadn't, and whether it was strength or exhaustion, and I decided eventually that the distinction didn't matter much. What mattered was what came next. In the weeks that followed, I had a conversation with Livia that I won't reproduce here in full. What I will say is that she came to the house on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, and sat at the kitchen table and told me she had not known about the forged signature, that she had believed because she had wanted to believe, that everything was being handled cleanly, that she had let Grant's version of events fill in the parts she hadn't looked at directly. She cried. Not the kind of crying that's designed to be witnessed. The other kind. The kind that makes you look bad and feel worse, which meant it was real. I did not tell her I forgave her. That word felt too large and too easy for what had happened. But I told her I was glad she'd said it, and I meant that. Grant left her 3 weeks after the hearing. Once the sale money disappeared as a prospect, his plans for Atlanta seemed to lose their urgency. He relocated to Charleston with a woman from his office. Livia is managing it. She is still, in many ways, her mother's daughter. That does not disappear because a courtroom ruling says so, but she is also her father's, and that part is still in there. I can see it occasionally in small ways. I don't think about my mother often. When I do, I try to remember what my father said in the recording about frightened people and the languages of control. It does not always work. There are mornings when the memory of her voice saying, "Pack your things tomorrow," lands differently than I'd like it to. But I have learned not to punish myself for the feelings, because punishing yourself for feelings is just another form of control. You just learn to let them pass through and keep moving. The forgery referral is still being reviewed by the state attorney's office. I have not been told the outcome. I did not file the complaint to punish her. I filed it because the document exists and the law requires a response. And pretending otherwise would mean that what was done to me had no name. It had a name. It still does. Within 6 months of the hearing, I contracted a local restoration firm to begin work on the house. The hot pine floors were refinished. The back porch, the one I'd had repaired in 2021, was properly reinforced. The upstairs bathroom got the pipe replaced that had never been replaced. The water stain on the kitchen ceiling is still there. I made a decision about that one. It stays. I consulted with a non-profit attorney about the legal structure for what I had decided to do with the property, and 8 months after the hearing, the paperwork was finalized. The house at 1124 Drayton Lane, Savannah, Georgia, is now registered and operating as Bellamy House, a non-profit transitional residence for women who have been displaced by family conflict, inheritance disputes, or domestic situations that left them without stable shelter. It houses 4 women at any given time, with private rooms and shared common areas. There is a waiting list that I am working with a local social services organization to manage. The front parlor windows still have the original glass, still slightly green in the afternoon. Light. My father's chair is still on the front porch. The magnolia is still in the backyard. I kept his name on the house because this was always his, in the truest sense, not as property, but as the thing he spent his life protecting. I just happened to be the one he trusted to protect it after he was gone. My name is Naomi Grace Bellamy. I am 36 years old. I run a nonprofit housing program on weekends, and I manage a medical clinic's administrative operations from Monday through Friday. I pay my bills, I sleep through the night, I have a cup of coffee in the kitchen every morning before I start. And sometimes I look up at the water stain on the ceiling and feel something that, after everything, I can only call peace. My mother thought she had sold my share of this house. What she never understood, what she could not see, even when the proof was sitting right in front of her, signed and stamped and filed with Chatham County, was that my father had placed the whole of it in the hands of the daughter she spent a lifetime trying to make invisible. And the truth, when it finally spoke, did not need to raise its voice. She thought she sold my share. My father had already given me everything.